Yes, sir. Ram Singh sir just called. He's facing some technical issues. He'll join in a minute or two.
Okay. Joined.
Yeah, Mr. Amit, Professor Ram Singh has joined.
Professor Ram Singh.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I think, sir, you have joined. Welcome to the college.
Thank you, and I apologize. There was a
It's
delay,
fine.
so somehow.
It's fine. We are also finding some technical this thing.
So yeah, welcome, Professor Ram Singh. Yeah, we can continue now, na? Hajika?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. We can start.
Yeah.
Esteemed Principal Ma'am, Madam C. Sheila Reddy, respected guests, Professor Ram Singh, Dr. Sachidananda Mukherjee, Dr. Santosh Das, Dr. Brahma Reddy, all the present faculty members and fellow students, a very good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I extend my warm welcome and gratitude to our invited guests for gracing this occasion with their virtual presence and enlightening us with their words of wisdom. We are gathered here today to deliberate upon the topic State of the Economy, Union Budget 2021. So let's take a brief moment to understand what the term budget entails. According to Article 112 of the Indian Constitution, Union Budget, also referred to as the annual financial statement, is a statement of estimated receipts and expenditures of the government for a given financial year. Some of the key objectives of a union budget are resource allocation, price control, and reducing economic inequalities. Faith is the bird that feels the light when the dawn is still dark. Referring to this quote by Rabindranath Tagore, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman during the budget speech added that this moment in history is the dawn of a new era where India is well poised to be the land of hope and promise. The Union Budget 2021 to 22, India's first paperless budget, was presented in the Lok Sabha on February 1st, 2021 with two main themes. First, laying down the vision for Atmanirbhar Bharat, the Union Budget is set to increase self-reliance and India's ability to become a global manufacturing hub across sectors to promote domestic enterprises. Secondly, the reliance on technology to increase efficiency in governance, access to services, and quality of goods and services. It is pertinent to mention here that the net receipts are estimated at 19.76 trillion rupees and the total expenditure is expected to be 34.83 trillion rupees. Now, I would like to invite our worthy principal, Madam C. Sheila Reddy, to give the welcome address.
Very good morning to all of you. Indeed, I am glad to note that the BA Program Committee and Department of Economics, both in collaboration, are organizing this symposium on a very pertinent and important topic, which needs a lot of deliberation and discussion, that is the State of Economy Union Budget 2021. Distinguished speaker, keynote speaker, Professor Ram Singh from Delhi School of Economics, and other eminent panelists for today's discussion, that is Dr. Sachidananda Mukherjee from NIPFP, Dr. Santosh Das, Assistant Professor, Mr. Brahma Reddy from Sri Venkateshwara College. Dear students, a very good morning to all of you and a warm welcome to this symposium. This symposium assumes significance more so in the light of the recently released economic survey, which forcefully states that following the COVID-19 pandemic, India has fallen into the vortex of a once-in-a-century crisis. It also projects a V-shaped growth of recovery and reiterates the call of the Economic Survey 2019 and 20 for ethical wealth creation by combining the invisible hands of markets with the hand of trust. The hope is that the market-mediated growth will take the country to desirable socio-economic outcomes that include not only reducing poverty, but also a wide spectrum that is ranging from infant mortality to mental illness. But how realistic it would be to abstract from the crony capitalism and corruption that dominate the political society and proceed from there to ethical wealth production. So this is a great challenge. And I'm also happy to note that the different dimensions and aspects of the today's theme for the symposium, that is State of Economy Union Budget 2021, have been identified for discussion. So in the panelist discussion, I note that we have deliberations on fiscal implications of GST, on NPA crisis and bank reconstruction, on transfers under 15th Finance Commission. So these are all significant aspects which need a lot of discussion, and I'm happy that the department has thought of organizing a symposium on such an important issue on which they need to be sharing different perspectives, because there cannot be one perspective to this, and events like this help in giving good perspectives and a direction. And I hope that this would certainly help the students, and it would be a very fruitful discussion and an enriching and rewarding experience for the students of the department and also the BA program students. With this, I convey my best wishes, and I thank all the speakers for this symposium who have spared their time to interact with the students and faculty of Department of Economics and BA program committee. And my best wishes, and hope you all have a great time ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your enlightening words. Now I pass on the mic to Ms. Yogita Yadav for the opening remarks.
A very good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Department of Economics and BA Program Committee, Shri Venkateshwara College, I would like to extend a formal welcome to each one of you present here to the Symposium on State of the Economy, Union Budget 2020-21. Today, that is March 11th, 2021, it has been exactly a year since WHO declared the coronavirus health crisis as a global pandemic. We are now living in a reality that none of us ever imagined. The COVID-19 pandemic has posed serious disruptions for India, and it has caused global challenges for health and wealth. Post-COVID recovery requires a major effort on the part of the government to bring back normalcy. And in this regard, Indian government has come out with mega fiscal stimulus packages under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. India is fortunate that we are now that the health impact in our country is now receding, and we now have vaccines that we're also supplying to many nations across the globe. The post-COVID recovery focus of the government is now on economic recovery, and major reports and indicators suggest that we are definitely on that path. The pre-budget economic survey and the union budget came out with a roadmap to sustain that recovery. And today, it is an exciting opportunity for us to hear about the intricacies of the budget and its implications for our economy from our esteemed guests, Professor Ram Singh, Dr. Sachidanand Mukherjee, Dr. Santosh Das, and Dr. Brahma Reddy. Sir, we heartily welcome you to our college and we extend our thanks for sparing your valuable time and agreeing to share your thoughts and insights with us. We all look forward to an enriching session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Without further ado, I invite Arushi to introduce our guests for the event.
Thank you, Hasika. Good afternoon to everyone. Professor Ram Singh from Delhi School of Economics will be addressing us today as the keynote speaker for the symposium. Professor Ram Singh holds a doctorate degree in the fields of law and economics, public economics, and contract theory. He was a scholar at University of Cambridge and a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard University. Professor Ram Singh has also acted as a visiting professor at Brown University, United States, and University of Hamburg and Heidelberg in Germany. He has also authored various articles in the Economic Times and the Hindu. We welcome you, sir, and we look forward to an amazing session.
Will this be my turn to start?
Yes, sir.
I can hear you.
So can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we
Yes,
can
sir.
hear you. We
All
can
right.
hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank the college, Honorable Principal of Sri Vivekananda College, faculty, students, and my co-panelist. I look forward to sharing my thoughts on the budget with you. I have put together a few bullet points. Let me see if I can share those with you. I have never worked with a team, so just bear me out.
So that's all right. Do you see the sharing? Yeah. Do you see the sharing option?
I open share tray. Will that be the one show?
So it should say share content.
No, I see open share tray. I tried that. It says screen share. Let me try this if it works. Entire screen application windows. Yes, I got it. Yeah. Do you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Let me also, do you see it move? Hello?
Yes, sir. We see the first slide, sir.
And do you see the second slide? I'm just checking so that there is no interruption in between.
No, sir. On the left side, all slides are visible in short form.
Okay.
The majority first slide is visible.
And now, do you see a different slide?
No.
Okay, so let me try this again.
Yes.
I
We
think
can
now
see the next one.
Yes, sir, we can see the second
We can
slide.
see the next one. Yeah.
But it's working
And
fine,
now
sir.
also.
You can.
All right. Okay. So, thank you. So there are several ways of looking at the budget. We can ask a question whether budget does enough to mitigate the damage, the loss inflicted on the economy by the pandemic. That's one way of looking at the budget. As was pointed out by the Honorable Principal and Dr. Yogita Yadav, that this budget has been presented after a crisis, once in a century kind of crisis. And every crisis offers an opportunity. Crises are a difficult time, but they are also time for introspection. They are also time to make fundamental changes. In that sense, every crisis is an opportunity. So, and from that viewpoint, we can ask a question whether budget uses the crisis, pandemic COVID crisis, as an opportunity to make structural changes in public accounts, to make structural changes in the economy. I will share my thoughts from both perspectives. So first, I will list what I have liked about this budget, and then I will list with you the areas where I feel concerned. So one of the things I have liked about this budget is that it has put this crisis to very good use. So in the media, you would notice people often saying that that government is fiscally constrained, and there was very little elbow room available to the government to do various things. In fact, because of the crisis, the elbow room available to the government to do things on various fronts, that situation has actually eased up.
So sorry to interrupt, but the PPT is not visible. Are you sharing?
I thought I had, yes. Let me.
So could you just try again once?
I will do that. Do you see it now?
Yes, sir.
Do you see a different slide? No. Now? Do you still see the same slide?
No, sir. It's fine, sir. It's fine.
It's
We
fine
can see
now.
the different.
Okay.
Sir,
All
the
right.
slide is changing, sir, as you change.
Okay, very good. True. Very good. True. So in normal times, we have there are several constraints on fiscal position of central government, state government. We have Fiscal Responsibility Management Act that makes it difficult for central government and state governments to do whatever they want to do on fiscal front. However, because of the crisis, the focus shifted from fiscal deficit. Focus shifted from telling government that do not go for fiscal expansionism. In fact, most scholars, most policymakers, most commentators were arguing that government should take extremely generous liberal view of fiscal deficit. And government has taken note of that, has used this opportunity. As a result, what you would have noticed two things about this year's budget. One is that the fiscal deficit for current fiscal year is going to be around 10% of GDP. So on face of it, it looks significant spike in fiscal deficit. Moreover, for next year also, fiscal deficit is projected to be 6.8% of GDP, and if anything, it's going to be about 7%. Now, this would not have been possible in normal times. In normal times, rating agencies, economists, commentators would have blamed the government that this much of fiscal deficit is not acceptable. But here I want to emphasize one thing, that it's not that government all of a sudden has increased expenditure from let's say less than 5% of GDP to 10% of GDP. No, it's not that. Also, it's not that for next year government is for next year the fiscal deficit, the expenditure has gone up compared to last fiscal year. That is also not the case. Why still these fiscal deficit numbers look so high compared to recent years in the past? That's because in the past, government used to not report, under-report true fiscal deficit figures. And how was that happening? I take it that this is no news for you. You know that government have been under-reporting fiscal deficit. I want to say a little bit, especially to students, how government used to do it. To meet fiscal policy target, to meet the ceilings, to keep itself within ceiling of Fiscal Responsibility and Management Act, central government used to report only some of its borrowings, not all borrowings, not all expenditures were reported. Some borrowings, some expenditures were kept off the balance sheet, public sector government balance sheet, especially borrowings by Food Corporation of India, borrowings by National Highways Authority of India, and several other public sector centrally owned enterprises. Their borrowings were not reported as a part of central government's account. they were kept away from the balance sheet of the central government. Like, for instance, Food Corporation of India has been borrowing from National Small Saving Funds, and National Highways Authority of India has been borrowing massive amount through what are called fully serviced bonds. But and this borrowed amount by Food Corporation of India, NHI, by other centrally owned enterprises and departments have been utilized, but they were not shown as a central government's borrowing. Now, this had, on one hand, it was not a transparent exercise, and therefore it did not give us a full picture of fiscal position of the center and of the economy. At the same, more important was its adverse consequence. Like Food Corporation of India used to borrow, has been borrowing from National Small Saving Funds at the rate of interest which is greater than 8%. But center can always borrow at the rate of 6%, around 6%. So this hiding some of the borrowings meant that the fiscal burden, the interest rate burden on account of borrowings was also excessively high. So the borrowing was inefficient, so to speak. That was more important issue with underreporting of fiscal deficit. With this budget, the government has brought these borrowings by Food Corporation of India, NHI, and most other borrowings on its account. As a result, you see there's a sudden significant spike in fiscal deficit numbers. It's not that the fiscal expenditures have gone up that significantly. It's because the accounts have become cleaner, transparent, which I think is a big plus. And as a consequence of this, the borrowing cost, interest rate cost will also come down, because now government can borrow directly and not through inefficient mechanisms, as pointed out. Moreover, the government has promised to clear the borrowings from National Small Saving Funds in next 2 years, and borrowings through fully serviced bond will be cleared as bonds mature. But in the future, these borrowings will be transparent, which we must appreciate. It is good for fiscal health of the center, and it's good for economy. Second thing I have liked about the budget is that it has initiated several capital market reforms. I will express my views in greater detail shortly. And third thing I have liked about the budget is that it has brought the focus on growth. It's not that government didn't want growth earlier, but in the past, government has been showing conservatism when it comes to spending to boost growth. But in this budget, government has taken more liberal view of fiscal deficit to pump prime the economy. So economy is projected to grow at a rate of 11%, and government has committed in the budget. Government has committed capital expenditure of more than 5.5 lakh crore, which is around 2.5% of GDP. It's not great, but significant increase of about 35% compared to the last budget. And while we are on infrastructure and public health, you would have noticed a statement by the Honorable Finance Minister saying that the expenditure on health and wellness has been increased by massive 137%. So here some details are important. So it looks like that health budget has gone up significantly, but that's not the case. So what has been done is that several schemes have been merged. Health sector and expenditure on schemes, drinking water schemes, for instance, they have been merged together. As a result, health-related expenditure, budgetary allocation, which is health-related, has gone up significantly. That is true. There's a massive increase there. But health budget in itself has not gone up even on year-on-year basis. It has not been increased significantly. So it's important to see this picture clearly. However, as far as health budget is concerned, the most important component is budgetary allocation worth 35,000 crore on vaccination. And this is very important. We should not look at 35,000 crore as 35,000 crore. Its implications for the economy is going to be significant. If you look at several sectors like hospitality, hotel, tourism, restaurants, travel and hospitality sectors are still reeling under COVID crisis. People have not been able to overcome the fear of the pandemic. As a result, very few people travel. As a result, millions of people who are employed in this labor-intensive activities, travel, tourism, hospitality, those jobs are still those jobs are still unretrieved. But as vaccination drive picks up, so hopefully people will be able to overcome the fear, and then demand in these activities, in these sectors will pick up, and those lost jobs will be retrieved. So the multiplier effect of 35,000 crore is going to be very significant. For this year, it's going to be much greater than multiplier effect of expenditure. But multiplier effect on infrastructure. Infrastructure budget has been raised to a decent level. There are healthy allocations for railways, for roads, for like say upward of 1 lakh crore for railways as well as road. And for rural infrastructure also, there is a budgetary allocation worth 40,000 crore. Now, why is it important? For one, the multiplier effect of infrastructure spending is large. But during last year, the actual expenses on infrastructure had come down. And this had come down after a significant progress that we had seen in the road sector, in railway sector, in other sectors also. For instance, these panels, this figure tells you the pace of expansion of national highways over last 7-8 years, and also construction rate per day. So government had, in fiscal year 18-19, government had almost achieved its target of building 30 kilometers per day of national highways. But this, and similarly, there was impressive progress on rural road construction. And rural road construction has played important role along with the MNREGA in enhancing rural wages. So, but all these activities, road construction, infrastructure, suffered during COVID. Because of COVID-induced lockdowns, all these activities came to a grinding halt. Millions of jobs were lost, businesses were lost, leading to NPAs for non-banking financial companies. So it is important to retrieve these jobs, these businesses, these activities, and therefore focus on infrastructure in this budget is a welcome move. Now I want to say a little bit about the third thing I have liked about this budget, which is that talking about right things, raising important issues when it comes to capital market reforms. Last year expenditure, GDP growth, whatever, it's a contraction, but even, so the contraction has been mitigated. The damage has been mitigated by two factors. One is the healthy growth in agriculture, and other is the expenditure by government. Expenditure by government also, it is actual expenditure is less than what you will see in budget numbers, and actual government expenditure on new expenditure in current fiscal year is less than what you will see in budget numbers. That's because government has repaid the amount that was due to SMEs, to contractors, infrastructure contractors, and other vendors. So all those expenses have been are now part of government expenditure. As a result, government expenditure, total expenditure has seen a significant raise, significant increase during this fiscal year. But even if we look at the new expenditure, public expenditure, there is a decent raise there. So as a result, public expenditure, government expenditure, along with the decent growth in agriculture, has reduced, has mitigated the damage, the disaster that pandemic had inflicted on our economy. But in this entire picture, the private investment has been missing. Capacity utilization in private sector is still below 70%. Demand remains low. For one, many people lost their jobs and their income, and as a result, purchasing power suffered. Other people were lucky. Many informal sector, government jobs were lucky not to lose their job, but they did not spend. Since there was less spending, less demand, and in such a situation when capacity utilization is already low, there is not much point for private sector to invest. And there has been very little, actually, there has been extremely disappointing growth or no growth in credit to private sector. So, and therefore this issue needs addressing. Even before pandemic, there was private investment had crippled. Banks were reluctant to lend, and investors were reluctant to borrow. So in such a situation, it is important to address this issue. Without private sector investment, economy cannot grow. As I pointed out, that this year's capital expenditure, budgetary allocation for capital expenditure is about 2.5% of GDP. That is really a pittance compared to what is needed. The investment has to come from private sector. Investment in national infrastructure pipeline also has to come from the center, 40%, roughly 40% from the center, 40% from states, and remaining 20% from the private sector. This year, states are in no position to contribute 40% of investment towards national infrastructure pipeline. Again, then onus is back on the center and the private sector. Center's contribution is merely 2.5%. What we should be looking at is investment of 10% of GDP in infrastructure. And that can't be achieved without private sector investment. Now, towards that, the budget has made threefold announcement. One is that divesting or making public assets available for private sector through monetization of public assets, monetization of roads, land, airport, and other assets. So how will monetization work? Well, so if you have used a national highway, many of our national highways are tolled. And next time you stop at a toll plaza on national highways, if you see the name of toll plaza something, but name ends with private limited. It could be, for instance, Delhi, Jaipur highways, private limited. So a private name, toll plaza name that ends with private PVT Ltd dot, it suggests that this road segment, this highway segment has attracted private investment. The road has been built by a private entity. So, and now private entity can charge toll, is charging toll. That's one example of monetization of road assets. Many of our national highways, state highways have not been monetized. They are not being tolled in the sense that the user fee is not charged on those road segments, but will be charged now. Can be charged now. If that happens, that will be monetization of roads. Railway. So as to monetization of land, railways is holding on large tracts of unutilized land. That's true for Defense Ministry, many other ministries and public sector undertakings. Though those land parcels can be leased out. In some cases, government may even sell off those land parcels. But whatever happens, that will also be an example of monetization of public assets. then government is looking to privatize public sector undertakings. So you would have read in media or heard in media commentaries that the word privatization is used for the first time by finance minister while presenting the budget. So in the past, finance ministers, governments have been reluctant to use the word privatization, even though that's what they were trying to do. But this time, finance minister was explicit and has put 2 public sector banks and 1 general insurance company on the block. So if they are able to privatize and divest from LIC and other public sector entities, that would mean that public capital, government capital will be replaced with private capital, and that would be one way to bring in private investment. Other is to directly go for brownfield or greenfield projects. And towards that end, this budget provides for Development Finance Institution. Formal name given is National Bank for Financing Infrastructure and Development. It also aims to facilitate borrowings directly from public and other non-individual entities through trust, infrastructure investment trust, real estate investment trust. It also sets up bad banks to take care of non-performing assets in banking sectors. These are some of the appreciable announcements. Moreover, it has the budget finance minister also announced that FDI limit in insurance sector will be raised to 74% from existing 49%. So these are important steps initiated. These are important initiatives. A lot will depend on their execution. So on each count, there are concerns. On count of privatization, for instance, privatization of a bank, one has to be careful to make sure that public sector banks do not end up in hands of private industry leaders. If that happens, that will not be in long-term interest of the economy. Moreover, unless the other concern would be that if these public sector banks are merged and are sold to one entity in private sector, can it make a bank too big to fail? A big entity, private sector entity, can be ultimately a burden for the taxpayer, for the society, for the economy. So we will have to watch out for this. As to development finance initiatives and bad banks, so these are on their own, these are important steps, but a lot will depend on the execution of these schemes. For example, bad bank, how will bad bank work? Well, idea is that the bad bank, it will not be a bad bank. It's just that a bank, an entity that will be called bad bank. What will this entity do? It is supposed to take, buy NPAs, non-performing assets of banks. And what is NPA? NPA is actually a loan that is not being serviced, where the borrower has defaulted. So for instance, let's say SBI, if SBI lends to me and I stop servicing the loan, I become a defaulter, then that loan becomes a non-performing asset in the account books of State Bank of India. So this bad bank is supposed to take such non-performing assets and then work full time to chase after defaulters to make recoveries. On face of it, it looks it's a good idea. But the problem with a banking sector is that bankers are reluctant to make decisions where they have to exercise discretion. This is one of the reasons why bankers are reluctant to lend loans in big sizes. So this problem will become especially pronounced when a bank has to sell its its non-performing asset. So when a bank has to sell its non-performing asset, that means that that the bank will get money less than value of loan in its book. But how much less? This will require discretion, decision making on part of bankers, CEOs, and then for some time people have become apprehensive that maybe tomorrow an enforcement agency will second guess their decision, will question them, will harass them, and because of that concern, many bankers do not take decision. If they don't take decision, then this bad bank may not take off. Similarly, the issue of raising FDI limit on insurance sectors. On face of it, it's a welcome move. But question we should be asking is that what is the case for raising FDI limit? So FDI can be beneficial in any sector, including insurance sector. Insurance sector, we need to develop our insurance sector for two important reasons. One is that as economy, market-driven economy, as it prospers, as it grows, then risk profile of economy grows, because most activities, economic activities, are risky. Their outcome can be less profitable, loss-making, profit-making. So riskiness of a market-driven economy goes up. As a result, insurance sector plays an important role. So the kind of products, insurance policies that should be offered by insurance sector, they play important role in mitigating the risk. The other important role, and in my view, even more important role, is that insurance sector and pension funds can play in financing of infrastructure. Today, our infrastructure financing suffers from problem of what is called asset liability mismatch. What is asset liability mismatch? To explain this problem, think of a highway project, or think of project like Delhi Airport, Mumbai Airport. So GMR Group invested in Delhi Airport. Now they invested huge sums in upgradation of Delhi Terminal 3, Terminal 1, and still they are investing. But by the time these projects, these airports start, they turn into a profit-making entity. It is several decades, several years, in some cases, several decades after investment has been made. In other words, to make investment in infrastructure, the investor needs funds for decades. So their borrowing needs are for decades. They can service their loan, their debt, only after several decades, several years, several decades of when they borrowed. In contrast, so therefore we need somebody who is in a position, we need some entities, some financial entities that can lend for decades. Today, lending is done by non-banking financial companies who borrow from commercial banks. And so commercial banks, public sector banks, private sector banks have invested a lot in infrastructure. Do our commercial banks have enough money to lend for decades? No, they do not. So because they raise money from individuals, so we invest in a bank for years. Rarely we invest, have accounts in a bank. We deposit money in a bank for decades. We do not. So it means that the money banks have, that money is not available for decades. That money is available only for few years, in some cases few months. So, and that explains the mismatch. The borrower in infrastructure need money for decades, but banks do not have money that they can hold on to for decades. And this is asset liability mismatch. This asset liability mismatch can be corrected if we bring in insurance companies into the picture. If insurance companies can lend directly to infrastructure investors, then picture changes. Because you think of yourself buying life insurance, health insurance, people start buying health insurance while they are still young, healthy. You buy life insurance when you are healthy and have life half a century or more of a century life ahead. Point is that insurance companies have money that they can hold on for decades, and therefore they can use that money to lend for infrastructure investment. Similarly, pension funds have money that they can hold on to for decades, and therefore that is the right money to be investing in infrastructure. Towards that end, we need to make significant changes in the insurance sector. Will FDI help? Only partially. FDI will help in the sense that, when foreign insurance companies come, they will hopefully bring more insurance products. They will bring more money also. So more money will be available for lending to infrastructure. So, and to that extent, it's a welcome move. But our problem is that we are not using the money that we have as an economy, as a country. Our insurance companies are forced to invest. Their 50% of their investment, actually more than 50% of their investment, has to be in government securities. That is not a wise thing to do. Insurance money with insurance companies should be available for investing in infrastructure through private investment. So unless we take care of regulatory reforms like this, these otherwise welcome moves may not be as effective. Then now I come to the issue that was mentioned by, I think it was mentioned by Yogita, that when she listed public sector expenditure, and here is what the revenue receipts. These bars give you picture of revenue receipts. You can see, I think I should wind up. Let me not. So let me take just 2 minutes to express areas of concerns. In short run, areas of concerns would be regulatory reforms in insurance sector, in pension funds, and also in infrastructure projects. Today, infrastructure projects suffer from contractual disputes between government and private sector entities. Unless we clear that mess, infrastructure investors will still be reluctant to invest in infrastructure. And one concern I have is that the relaxation of Fiscal Responsibility and Management Act hopefully will not completely take away fiscal discipline, sense of fiscal discipline that was. From long-term viewpoint, the areas of concern remain unemployment, health, and education. So on account of health and education, as I pointed out, that budgetary allocation for health has not gone up significantly. Similarly, allocation for education is much less than what we should be investing. Our next decades, most jobs are going to come through service sector, and service sector is now increasingly getting digitized. That means that to be able to generate jobs, we need educated and skilled youth, and that requires investment in education. It requires investment in health. Unemployment remains our serious problem. People have criticized the budget that it has not increased the NREGA allocation, but that criticism is unfounded. It's misdirected criticism. Because so there are two ways of government can respond to unemployment in two ways. One is that government can take jobs to where people are. MNREGA does that. It takes jobs to people where unemployed people are sitting. Now, for this year, the budgetary allocation is less than actual expenses last year, but that's not a problem at all. Why it's not a problem? Well, MNREGA is a demand-driven program. So if demand goes up, then government is legally bound to provide money for the program, and therefore one should not worry too much about what the budgetary allocations are. The other way of responding to unemployment problem is to hope that people will come. You create jobs wherever you can, and then hope that people will come and take those jobs. On that count, I think vaccination drive will go a long way in creating jobs. Similarly, project execution in infrastructure will also have multiplier effect in job creation. And because of vaccination will also facilitate migration of unemployed from where they are located to where jobs are. Therefore, execution is going to be very important. And depending on the level of execution, nature of execution, we will see different possible outcomes. I stop here. I'll be happy to take questions, but perhaps I have already exceeded the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful presentation. I am sure each and every person attending the presentation learned a lot. Now I would like to request the audience to put forward their questions. The floor is open for any sort of queries and doubts.
You may also want to keep track of time. I think I exceeded my mandate. I was told to take only 20 minutes and I have taken longer.
So it's fine.
Okay.
Dr. Ramsingh, in the course of your presentation, you had drawn attention towards something in the budget relating to the monetization of assets like land, railways, airports, etc. So how do you see it in the context of the build, operate, and transfer sort of problems, which otherwise we confront? That is, we have the tolls which are basically being taken for that. So what is going to be the implication of this with respect to rise in user charges, which would come in the days to come?
Right. So should I respond to the question, or should we take maybe one or two more questions and then I respond?
Yeah, sir, this is Amit Jha. Sir, I have two queries, in fact, sir. So you were talking about multiplier effects of this vaccination, and you said that some 35,000 crores have been allocated to this vaccination drive. But recently, I just read that there has been a DA freeze, and it is up to around 37,000 crores. So the next three installments of the DA freeze is giving this 35,000 crores for the COVID vaccination. So don't you think, sir, that it's just a way of compromising at one place and giving the money at some other place? So will that lead to some sort of compromising the multiplier effect? So this is my first thing, and the second thing is, sir. So the bad banks, the US experimented with this idea in 2008, with the US the crisis, the housing bubble crisis and all. The US experimented with this idea, and they had something called TARP, but it had a very moderate success, very moderate success. So and in view of this, that probably moral hazard will come in with respect to bad banks. Isn't it? Basically, I would like to take your comments.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
these
these are
are
my
both
two.
very important points, and let me respond to this. So first question related to monetization. So monetization and its implications for user charges. It is true, when you monetize infrastructure assets, and government wants to go big on monetization of infrastructure assets, it would mean user charges will be introduced. Now, are user charges bad or not? So user charges are bad for people who will pay for road services, who have not been paying so far. Roads are used as a typical example of public goods in economics textbooks, even though roads are not typical. Well, even so, if you assume that roads are uncongested and therefore qualify for non-rivalrous consumption, as you introduce toll, user charge, then non-excludability argument will not apply, and therefore a road will cease to be a public good. So that will be an implication of it. But question is it necessarily bad? Here I want to emphasize that economics allows us, it's a discipline that allows us to slice a situation in different pieces and analyze, and then put the picture together, and we can then take call whether overall situation is better or not. You see, if you do not introduce user charges, let's say through toll plazas, Then how do you raise money? You have to then increase taxes. Given reality of Indian economy, government, state government, central government, to raise revenue, they will have to raise taxes also, and within taxes they will have to raise indirect tax like GST rates, which causes distortion at economy wide. In contrast, user charges will cause some distortion, but that distortion is restricted. That distortion is more targeted to people who directly benefit from that facility. So if you ask my take on it, I am for introduction of user charges on national highways. National highways are generally used by relatively well-off people. They are also used for transportation of freight, and introduction of user charges will increase freight charges, and therefore will also increase prices of goods and services. That is absolutely true. But distortion will be more if you have to resort to increasing excise duty, sales duty on diesel and petrol, or if you have to increase indirect taxes in generally. So this is more targeted distortion, and therefore less distortionary. That's what I believe. As to monetization of land, it's going to be tricky issue. It's going to be tricky on two counts. If government decides to sell its land parcels, railways decide to sell land parcels, then it's going to create twofold problem. One, that there's a scope for there's a scope for corruption, and since there is a scope for corruption, this program itself may not take off. While our concerns are legitimate on account of monetization, but we should also keep in mind that government is being over optimistic. I don't think government will be able to realize its target on monetization of assets, and especially with respect to land, I would want to be cautious. So land monetization, I am generally not in favor of that. You can lease land out. That is absolutely okay. Retain ownership with public sector. Lease it out through competitive bidding. That would be the way to recommended way to go about it. As to Amit's point about the trade-off between, on one hand, government has provided for 34,000 crore for vaccination, but it also has freezed DAs. Will that cancel? Will the multiplier effects cancel out? No. The DA freeze is applicable to government employees. And you see, people like us have spent very little during COVID time. Even if we get enhanced DAs, we get DAs that we were due to get, or even if there's an increase in DA, we are unlikely to spend a significant proportion of that. The point is that we do not spend as much, especially those people who are employed in public sector are really among privileged Indians. I mean, not that we are doing great, but compared to other Indians, who are employed in informal sector, who are employed in agriculture, we are well off. We do not spend as much. As a result, multiplier effect is very small when you pay additional when you increase wages, salaries for government public sector employees. And as by implication, the contraction by freeze in DA will also be minuscule compared to multiplier effect through vaccination. So even if that was the motivation, I would say that is a good decision to spend more on vaccination. So we are doing all right there. As to your concerns about bad bank, I fully share your concerns. The American experiment with bad bank was not successful. If anything, it did not hedge the risk. It was supposed to hedge risk, but if anything, it compounded the risk, and that led to subprime crisis. That was also partly bad bank experiment had something to do with that 2008 crisis. Our problem is going to be even more severe. Our problem is going to be, as I pointed out, that bankers today, bankers are holding on to massive NPAs, and it will be difficult for them to take call at what price this NPAs should be sold to bad bank. So, but a lot will depend on its execution. If it is all private, if bad bank is all private, we face kind of risk that came up in 2008 crisis in the US. If it is all public, in the sense that all government officials are going to manage it, then there'll be inefficiencies and indecisiveness on part of officials. So perhaps optimum mix of it will have to be carefully designed. That's what I can say at the moment.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for the answer, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, I have a query. Sir, with regard to the insurance companies, as you know, India's insurance sector is dominated by public sector, particularly LIC in the life insurance segment, which has about 25 lakh crore of assets. As you correctly said, there are several restrictions on LIC with regard to LIC's investment policy. They are forced to invest in government securities. Now, do you think privatizing LIC is a solution to this, so that the organization will allocate its resources as per their policy?
Yes, this is also important issue. No, I don't think privatization is the solution. I think my belief is that in every sector, we should have at least three, four public sector entities competing with each other and also with private sector entity. So privatization of LIC is not the solution. What will be solution? Solution will be to ease of life of LIC so that they can design more products, so that they can attract more money. You allow them to invest in infrastructure. Those are the ways. So you basically, my response is that we need to strengthen, we need to make decision making more autonomous, give more freedom to LIC, General Insurance Company of India, allow them to introduce more products, give them more autonomy, allow them to do better. And then you allow private sector entities to come in so that they can compete with one another. You said there is a serious trade-off between a public sector and private sector entity. That trade-off applies to Air India also. So, and you can, to illustrate the point, you can think of one private sector bank and public sector bank. I'm sure most of us have experienced with public sector banks and also private sector bank. When you go to a public sector bank branch, you feel unwelcomed. Your waiting time for whatever you want to do is long. It seems it's long. In contrast, if you go to a private sector bank branch, you are received well. They will do paperwork for you. They may even offer you tea, coffee, or some other refreshments. So you get a very different experience. But so this is one dimension. Other dimension is, which is very important dimension, that a public sector, you will rarely feel, you may feel frustrated in your dealing with public sector bank branch, but you will rarely feel cheated. In contrast, when you deal with the private sector bank, there will, especially when you have private sector credit cards issued by, or loan issued by private sector bank, on many occasions you will feel cheated. You will feel that they bring in terms and conditions which you are not informed, which were part of fine prints. So there are trade-off. On one hand, there are things that are good about private sector, but there are things you have to watch out for. And these issues become even more important when you think of insurance sector. So that means that it's important to keep public sector entities. It also means that it's important to regulate private sector entities to safeguard interest of consumers. Yeah, that's my response.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Tanish. I want to ask a question.
Yes, please.
Sir, since government is going towards privatization of public sector banks, but I was reading recently an article. So it said that government banks have made good progress in deposit sides. So basically, people are depositing their money, they are opening their accounts. Government is also sending money for the schemes like PM Kisan and all. But the problem lies in on the lending side.
That's right.
So should public sector banks be more cautious in lending, or we should privatize them? So I mean, what's your take on
Tanishq,
this?
I get the issue. So your point is, should public sector banks be more cautious in lending? Today, actually, paradoxically, it may seem paradoxical to you. Our problem from public sector banks is not that they are not cautious. They have become super cautious in lending, so much so that they do not lend for investment in infrastructure. They do not lend to non-banking financial companies. They do not lend for private investment. They have become super cautious, and this is the result of history of banking sector. There were times when banks were not cautious. There were times when telephone banking worked in our country, meaning thereby, so banks will lend big ticket loans depending on if they got signals from politicians or not, from ruling dispensation or not. That led to problem of NPAs, and problem of NPAs then led to enforcement agencies investigating some frauds. That in turn led to situation where bankers have become super cautious. They now do not want to, if you are a CEO, you are a board member of a bank, public sector bank, or a senior manager, you fear that if I issue big ticket loan, tomorrow somebody may second guess, may raise objection. Why did you? And if that loan turns out to be bad, you should notice that investment in every sector at times will turn out to be bad. That's the nature of investment. Now, if an investment turns out to be bad, the borrower will not be able to repay, service the loan. And then you fear, as a banker, you fear that enforcement agency or somebody may go after you, that why did you lend to this entity? So we need to overcome this fear. That's what we need to do. And there, the message coming from government will be very important. Of course, banks should also exercise due diligence. Our banks do not have capacity to assess risk of project. That is very important. And it's also the market economies are not easy to deal with. So if banks do not have in-house capacity to assess project risk, then they have to rely on rating agencies. But rating agencies are corruptible. You see, when we had NBFC crisis, then all the loans that went bad were of companies that were rated as AAA rating. So it's a serious issue, but the solution is to enhance capacity of risk assessment by public sector banks, and assure them that good faith decisions will not be second guessed. You will not be penalized for good faith decision making.
Okay, sir. And sir,
Thank you.
there's this small query regarding. Sorry, I'm disrupting.
Yeah, Tanishq, can we we are short of time, Tanishq.
Okay.
Yeah,
So there's
but
just a
can
small thing.
yeah.
Just a small thing.
Okay. So this is the
Uh,
last, no? Yeah.
yeah. Okay, sure, sir. So
Um,
basically, earlier government used to use the word strategic disinvestment, and now they're using privatization. So is there any significant difference, or just the two ways of saying the same thing?
Idea behind strategic disinvestment was actually privatization. So now they are calling a spade, so to speak. Yes, basically it has in terms of substance there is no difference, but in terms of signaling value there's a difference. Now government is saying that we are okay. We are not only going for divestment. We are absolutely okay saying that it's privatization, and we want to. Basically, it has signaling value that they are serious about privatization. They are serious about divestment.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Uh, Thank you so much. It's a very insightful presentation. And now we will move on to our next segment, which is a panel discussion. So our panelists for today are Mr. Sachinanda Mukherjee, Mr. Santosh Kumar Das, and Mr. Brahma Reddy. Mr. Sachinanda Mukherjee is an associate professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Before joining NIPFP, he was with International Water Management Institute, Hyderabad, and Worldwide Fund for Nature, India, New Delhi. Mr. Mukherjee received his doctorate degree at the Madras School of Economics, Chennai, and received his master's degree at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He has published papers in national and international journals of repute. Today, Mr. Mukherjee will be addressing us on fiscal implications of GST. Our next panelist for today is Mr. Santosh Kumar Das. He is an assistant professor at the Institute of Studies in Industrial Development. He holds a doctorate degree from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, with focus on macroeconomics. He previously has worked in several research institutes, including Research and Information System, Ministry of Finance, and National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Mr. Das will be addressing us today on NPA's crisis and banking reconstruction. Our final panelist for today is Mr. Brahma Reddy. Currently, he is working as an assistant professor in the Department of Economics at Sri Venkateshwara College. Mr. Reddy completed his master's and MPhil in economics from University of Hyderabad. Mr. Reddy worked as an undersecretary in the 7th Central Pay Commission. He was a deputy director in the 13th Finance Commission and a research associate in the 12th Finance Commission. Mr. Reddy will be addressing us on transfers under 15th Finance Commission. The discussion will be headed by Mr. Sachinanda Mukherjee, followed by Mr. Santosh Kumar Das, and lastly, Mr. Brahma Reddy. So I will now give over to Mr. Sachinanda Mukherjee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, and I hope I am audible to all of you. Good afternoon.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
It gives me pleasure to share my thoughts with my students. Basically, I never get the chance to talk to students. So just I'll have something to share with you on my presentation. So I hope it will work. So I hope all of you can see my presentation. So see, the question is the fiscal implications of goods and services tax. I take the discussion to very short run kind of analysis given the uncertainties that we are going through. And since this discussion is in the context of the union budget as such is a very, I rather say is a very one-time event for a particular year. And it doesn't have very long memory, or it doesn't prospect or project a very long run kind of picture as of now, because the framework of our union budget is a very short run kind of analysis. So I keep my discussion very short run. So one thing of the budget is that that I must share with all of you, that how we have managed our fiscal situation of public finance in the last or the current financial year, and then from taking that what is the revenue, what is the expenditure, and what kind of fiscal arrangements, fiscal rules, and other things are in place within that framework, how we are going to project our revenue as well as expenditure. First, the revenue sides of the budget is projected, and then we take the demand for guns from all the public sector undertakings as well as the union departments, and then we project the overall expenditure. First, the revenue expenditure is adjusted with the tax and non-tax revenue. Then whatever is left over, we allocate that for the capital expenditure. That is the overall budget framework. Now the question is that since the topic of my discussion is on GST and the fiscal implication, first we have to understand that what is the dimension of GST, or how much the GST contributes in the union tax revenue. So I am taking the 2019-20 because 2019-20 is not a good financial year, and it is not also a very good fiscal year, because as compared to 2018-19 or 2017-18, if we compare 2019-18 was a bad year also. And 2020 was the worst year that we have seen for the last 1 decade or so. So 2019-19, 19-20, the contribution of GST was 30% of overall gross tax revenue. What are the other sources of revenue? So I have shown that it's coming the corporate taxation and the taxes on the income, that is the personal income tax, together is giving us around 50%, 51%, and other is the union excess duties, customs, and the others are the small.
Excuse me, Sachidananda.
Yes.
Dr. Mukherjee, your slides are not moving. At least I can't see them moving.
I haven't moved. Okay.
Oh,
so
I see.
this is my.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, please carry on.
Yeah. So this is the second slide. I am saying that the contribution of GST in union tax revenue. So now I'm moving my slide to the next slide, that the contribution of the GST overall gross tax revenue shortfall in the financial year 2021, how much is coming from the GST side. So if we talk about what was the budget estimate of the revenue, gross tax revenue was, and then what we have realized up to the revised estimate in 2021. For those students who don't know what is the revised estimate, what is the budget estimate, revised estimate is the 9 months actual and 3 months projection, and budget estimate is pure projection. So the thing is that the 34% of the overall gross tax revenue shortfall in the
Sachidananda Mukherjee, again it is not moving. We are not seeing the second slide.
Okay. Can you see the contribution of GST in shortfall?
No, we are seeing the first slide only.
Okay. Just a minute.
Now, okay.
Okay.
Now it's fine.
Now
Yeah.
it is okay, Professor Mukherjee.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I am talking about the contribution of the overall gross tax revenue shortfall in 2021, and 34% of this contribution is coming from the GST side. So except union excise duties, and all of you know that why union excise duties give the growth in 2021 as compared to other taxes, because union excise duties depends on mainly on petroleum products, because after GST is introduced, all the other goods and services have moved to GST, and only the petrol, diesel, ATF, and the crude petroleum and natural gas are put into the union excise duties. So when the overall shortfall was around 5.23 lakh crore, that is around 22% of the budget estimates of 22-21. A large part is due to the GST revenue shortfall. Now, what will be the fiscal implication of GST revenue shortfall in overall union finances as well as state finances? Since GST revenue didn't come, it gave a pressure, or it exerted a pressure on union finances to borrow more to finance the expenditure side of the budget. Now the thing is that union finances has some limitations of in terms of the expenditure cut, because these budgets, the union budgets, whatever the budget estimates on the programs and that thing, and this goes to the state finances in terms of that the state finances also give their matching funds for execution of centrally sponsored schemes and other kind of programs. So what happened? So in the year 2021, Union government was not able to cut the expenditure substantially, and when the revenue shortfall was very high, it actually leads to a fiscal deficit around 10% that we have already discussed in the earlier lecture. Now the thing is that what percentage of this this fiscal deficit, that is 9.5% or 10%, is actually due to the non-tax revenue? Because as also discussed in the earlier lecture, that there is a general reluctance to mobilize the non-tax revenue in India, not only for the union government but also for the state governments, because they don't want to impose the user charges. Take example of an OPD card in public hospital will cost you the 2 rupees. Now suppose, so if you are going to see a doctor and doctor is treating you, you may like to offer a cup of tea. So a cup of tea is cost around rupees 10 and you are paying only 2 rupees for OPD card. So this kind of non-tax revenue mobilization, we need to think of moving or imposing the user charges. And another thing that was one of the major shock of the 2021 the financial year we faced is that non-debt capital deficits mobilization target. Disinvestment targets was set 1,90,000 crore. We only mobilize around 30,000 crore like that. So these are the frameworks, the union finances, and when the revenue is not coming on the union taxes, there will be a spillover effect to the state finances in terms of lower tax devolution. It is not only the lower tax devolution, even the other kind of programs, basically the centrally sponsored schemes and other things, the revenue side and other kind of expenditure programs will be curtailed, or there will be some kind of budget restriction of the union government. There's another story of the GST that all of you are aware of, that the GST compensation. That was a big ticket item. That is because the GST revenue shortfall was there for the state finances as well as the union finances. And up to the June 2022, the union government or the GST Council, I must say, gave the security or gave the assurance to the state government to fulfill their revenue shortfall up to the first 5 years of GST introduction. But what happened that the GST compensation cess collection was not at par with what is the compensation requirement of the states. As a result of that, there's lots of confrontation between the state and the union government. And at last, the union government has agreed to give 1.10 lakh crore for this financial year 2021 through the market borrowings. So this is the additional pressure on the union finances. So my question always will be that what will be the GST impact overall in the, say, after the GST compensation period is over? I am much worried because since I work on these areas, so I am much worried about what will be the design, structure, and the other kind of problems that may arise after the GST compensation period is over. Now, taking the discussion further, what is the stabilization problem of the GST? There are several problems of stabilization of GST, and there are factors are there, and the ongoing COVID-19 is one of the factors. I must say that the COVID-19 is one factor, but the overall fall in or slowing down of economic growth is the major factor of GST mobilization. You know that frequent changes in the acts, rules, processes, procedures of the GST, and it is very difficult for the tax administration as well as the taxpayer to keep in track that how many changes is happening in acts, rules, processes, and procedures. So IT infrastructure is still not in robust shape. So there are lots of problems in the GSTN platform, and also the back-end processes of the GSTN that the state and union tax administration using. Different states have different stages of IT adoption. Take example of the states which are backwards. Their adoption of the IT infrastructure in the field level, basically the below districts or below the blocks or below the kind of thing, because there is also the tax administration. They don't have access to good internet speed, good computer, hardware, software infrastructure. So accessing the tax administration data still is a problem for many tax administration officials. Efficiency of tax administration, that is a legacy problem, I must say, because we have introduced the VAT, and on VAT we have introduced the GST, but we haven't touched the tax administration at all, because the tax administration still function on the mode of the, say, around the last what was there in the last 30 years back. Still in the same mode the tax administration is working. So we need to have tax administration reforms for better tax compliance, and also they enforce the tax compliance on taxpayers. Tax compliance, the other problem is that there are several GST returns that is to be submitted every month, but there are taxpayers who are submitting only one return, that is GSTR 3B. They don't submit the GSTR 1. There's a huge lag between these two tax returns submissions. So tax compliance is still is not in full capacity level. And all of you are aware of the tax evasion, because every day if you open your newspaper, you will say there'll be arrests. So yesterday news was that there are 357 arrests have been made by state and central tax administration till now on fraudulent transaction, fake invoices, and all kind of thing. And all this, I must say that what was the regime earlier before the 2021, what is the regime now? We used to trust, the tax administration used to trust the taxpayers that they will come and comply. But what we have seen, that the tax compliance is always required some kind of power of tax administration. So there's a fine balance that the literature says, that the trust versus power. Now the union government or the state governments are using the power-based approach of tax administration. Now, taking the discussion of what we expect the tax revenue is to come from the 21-22 financial year, I must say that the tax revenue projection of 21-22 is quite optimistic, because see that the growth projection that we have, the nominal growth projection is, we are assuming that it will be around 11% of the real growth, or around 14.4% will be the nominal growth, like that in the union budget. But if we see the growth projected in the taxes side is a very high growth, both in direct taxes and indirect taxes. And I must say that the union excess duties, I don't know why they have expecting a fall in growth in 2021. Perhaps they are keeping some fiscal pace for cutting the union excess duty rates on petrol, diesel, and ATF. Because otherwise, I don't think there's any reason to expect that union excess duty collection will be falling in 21-22. And the thing is that the tax buoyancy, that is the ratio between the growth of tax collection and the tax GDP growth. If we take the overall gross tax revenue buoyancy, they are expecting around 1.2% or 1.2 in 21-22 as compared to 2021. That is quite high. That is quite high in the sense that still the uncertainties surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic is not over. As my earlier speaker have already told, that there are several sectors are still under pandemic, and they still have to revive their full potential output or capacity level of employment or like that. So taking the expecting the CGST revenue will be around tax buoyancy will be 1.6. I think is quite optimistic assumption. And with that, I will conclude. But if you have any questions, I would love to take those.
Thank you, sir. All the questions regarding the panel discussion will be taken at the end after every speaker. So now I would like to invite Mr. Santosh Kumar Das.
Yeah, thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank Venkateswar College for inviting me to speak on such an important issue. I'll be very brief. I'll try to sort of, complete my intervention or talk in 20 minutes, the time that has been allocated to me. So I'll start with my screen sharing. For me also first time on team, so please bear with me. So, no. Can someone please guide me how to? Okay.
Sir,
Okay, yeah, it's done now.
next to the mic. Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So in this talk, what I will do is basically I'll try to give you a snapshot about the current sort of ongoing NPA crisis in the Indian banks, and the kind of policies that we have been sort of pursuing over a few decades or so, and what is the sort of way forward for the banking sector, what kind of policies possibly, what kind of policies that we may require to sort of rebuild the banking sector as a whole. So I'll start my lecture. Since this is a brief sort of snapshot of my talk today, I'll be briefly discussing about the banking landscape as it exists in India, and what are the major features of the current NPA crisis. And here I must mention why I'm talking about the current NPA crisis, because now, as you may aware about, there has been some definitional changes, and there are also one earlier phase of NPA during uh, early 90s. So I'm basically looking at, I'll be speaking about the current phase, which sort of started picking up and post sort of crisis period. And I'll be very brief on discussing about the impact of NPAs on banks, and very brief on why NPA occurs, sort of what are the reasons behind NPA so occurring at this massive scale. Then what are the sort of policies or sort of resolution mechanisms that is in place in recent past quarters, the issue of NPA, and then perhaps to sort of argue for an appropriate banking sector policy. For India. Coming to my next sort of first component of my presentation, which is basically to give you a snapshot what is sort of banking landscape. Here it's basically it's very critical to understand when I say banking landscape. Here I must say you must see the relative sort of dominance of the banks in terms of bank ownership. We have public sector banks, we have private banks, and also we have foreign banks. So, and the dominance of the or you can say the relative presence of the banks can be seen on different. It can be measured in terms of different indicators. It can be in terms of asset share. It can be in terms of deposit share. It can be in terms of advance share. Here I have just taken the dominance of the public sector banks has declined, but still it's there. They disperse more than 60% of the loans advances in the as of now. And on the other hand, we'll find the role of sort of private sector, or the relative importance of the private sector banks has gone up substantially. In the post reform period. So this is one. And why this is important to any NPA analysis?
Sir, sorry to interrupt. I think your screen is not visible, if I'm right.
Okay.
And might be the volume could also be increased.
Yes, 1 minute. Is it now visible? Is it visible now?
So it is visible right now.
Okay.
Screen is visible, but the volume could be increased.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Is this okay now? Hello. So is this okay?
Yeah, now it's fine. Now.
Okay, okay. So why I'm just emphasizing on the relative sort of importance of bank groups, because since we are going to analyze the sort of the state of NPAs in Indian banks, it's important to understand which category of bank lends how much. Coming to my next slide here, I just wanted to give you a brief sort of snapshot about the size of the Indian banks. I may say this is the data is as of March 19, before mergers happening. So we can see among the public sector banks is the SBI, which lends about almost 1/4 of the total loans in the Indian banking sector. When it comes to the private banks, is the SDFC, ICICI, and Axis Bank. They are the sort of dominant private banks in India. SDI lends about 8.5% of the total credit of the Indian banking sector, and ICICI more than 6%, and Axis Bank more than 5%. Foreign banks do not have that much of exposure in terms of loan. So you just saw that it's largely the public sector banks who lend in terms when it comes to their share in total advances or total credit. They are the one who largely lend. And the second question is basically, and they are the one who are actually facing the issue of NPA crisis. So now the point is, what is NPA? What is the definition that is being followed when you say about NPA? It's about the asset becomes a non-performing asset when it fails, it ceases to generate income for the bank. And for instance, somebody who has borrowed a loan has failed to sort of repay his loan in principle, or sort of its interest due. If the due is over 90 days, then that can be sort of categorized as NPA. And before I come to, I mean, the sort of the trends of NPA and what is happening to sort of NPA over time. We must show how they are classified, but how the assets of a bank is classified. When it comes to NPA, like, NPA is also within NPA. You have different sort of varieties of classification. We have substandard asset, we have doubtful assets, we have loss assets, and the combination of three asset categories is NPA. And that already I have mentioned here. I don't have to explain what it is. You may kind of read. So that is the sort of state of affairs in the banking sector. As I said, the substandard asset, doubtful assets, and loss assets, that the combination of the three categories is the NPA in the Indian banks. And you can see the sort of the share of standard assets when it comes to the banking sector as a whole has declined over time. And now it's basically the NPA would be the combination of the rest three category would be of more than 9%, 9%. So that shows the NPA level. And when it comes to the loan classification of the public sector banks, we'll find the asset category of the classification of the public sector banks is relatively worse in the sense you have the NPA level is much higher. This is what the NPA sort of trend shows. You can see during the post sort of asset quality review exercise that was done during 15-16 post AQR, you can see the volume of NPA has gone up substantially, and that is not only true for private banks, that is also true for that is not only true for public sector banks, that is also true for private banks, though the rate of NPA is very low in private banks. Here I may just give you a brief snapshot what is happening, which are the banks that are having high level of NPA. You will find most of the public sector banks are having high sort of NPA GNPA ratio. When I say GNPA ratio, it's basically the ratio of NPA to total disbursement. So most of the public sector banks are facing the NPA crisis, and though the private banks do not face as a whole similar level of crisis, but still there are some banks which face which have recorded sort of accumulated significant volume of NPA. One of them is ICICI Bank, close to 6.5%. Another one is Axis Bank, about no more than 3%. And when it comes to foreign banks, though they do not have adequate exposure when it comes to lending, but yet like banks like Standard Chartered Bank has an GNP ratio of more than 10%. So here I must mention one point. This whole notion of public sector banks are inefficient in a way, and that's why the GNPA ratio or the NPA level is very high vis-a-vis the foreign banks and sort of private banks is not true, because you can find in the among the categories of private banks and foreign banks, you can see banks having high level of NPA. That's number one. Number two, I may mention here, which is very important for all of us to know. When I said, it's largely the public sector banks who lend. When I say this, I say it because it's largely the public sector banks who lend to big ticket projects. When it comes to big ticket projects in the infrastructure sector, big ticket projects in the industrial sector, so it is largely the public sector banks. They are the one who actually fund these big ticket projects, and largely the NPA is coming from those sectors now. I'll just in a while I'll brief you in detail about the sources of NPA in terms of fund utilization. But when it comes to the private sector banks, other than ICICI, you won't find any other private bank having exposure to industrial loans or infrastructure loans. You can see there is a remarkably sort of significant difference in terms of the pattern of lending when it comes to private banks and public sector banks. So public sector banks largely, you can see most of their if you see total volume of loan and how much goes to industrial project and infrastructure project, you'll find more than 60%, close to 70% of the fund goes to these activities. But when it comes to private banks, largely you'll find they tend to sort of fund personal loans. They prefer personal loans. They prefer consumer loans. They prefer sort of credit card loans. So it's largely the consumer loans. That is what the strategy of the private sector bank is, and there is a difference in terms of lending activities and the lending pattern. This is very much important for us to understand this. Then only we can understand the NPA crisis with proper sort of perspective. I'll just keep all those because I wanted to just analyze what is the sort of current dominant features of the current sort of NPA crisis at the moment. One feature, as I said, is basically the NPA is very high in public sector banks. Number one. Number two is basically the NPAs are located largely in the non-priority sector. Sorry, in the non-priority sector. And that is also true for the private sector banks. And when it comes to sort of industry-wise analysis, we'll find NPAs as largely sort of located in the industrial sector that you can see from this sort of graph. That is another feature. And if you look at sort of the sub-sector-wise analysis, which are the sectors which are actually largely the defaults are coming from which sectors, you'll find is largely the infrastructure sector, it's the mining. You'll find other sectors like chemicals and other chemicals and their products, basic metal and their products, and also engineering products. So these are the sectors largely you can find the sort of defaults happening. So basically, as I said, though this was the second sort of component of my presentation, where I just said what are the key features of the current NPA crisis. Now the third aspect is when NPA happens, how it's impact the banks. So it can impact the bank in various ways. One way could be like the data is here not updated. So I'll just explain you a bit, like the bank's financial performance goes down. They are on performance indicators. There is the issue of liquidity. The liquidity level of the banks goes down, and also their capital level goes down. The capital, and that's why you must be hearing about, periodically there has been capital infusion in sort of public sector banks to sort of boost liquidity in the bank, and overall their performance in terms of the earning in performance on the indicators of earnings, basically their earning on their interest earning and non-interest earning, and the overall profitability of the bank goes down. It's a different debate whether we should analyze the public sector banks on these parameters or not, given their mandate. But yet, yes, on these accounts we'll find banks face serious sort of challenges in terms of liquidity, on account of liquidity, on account of their own earning from their assets. Now about the fourth component, to be very brief, why NPA occurs. There are different ways to understand this. So here I'll be very brief, as I may say. The loan is basically sort of an interaction between two economic agencies. One is the lender, it's largely the banks, and the borrower, the person who is borrowing the loan. The loan, the borrower can be an individual or a group of individuals, a company, and there are different companies registered under different acts. So this is basically a transaction between one economic agent, which is a bank, another economic agent, which is an individual or group of individual or a corporate. And also there is a third sort of agency which is playing its role, is basically the regulator. And the fourth aspect, which is basically all these three agencies, they are playing their role within a given economic sort of, you can say, policy architecture. Within that policy architecture, these three sort of economic agents are playing their own role. So, and the NPA, one loan turning into NPA can happen because of the lapses, or you can say that because of the due to banks also as lenders, they may not have followed a particular sort of approach. I mean, they may not have followed their due diligence. They may not have assessed the risk associated with the bank, and also there are a lot of operational issues in the bank which gives adequate space for collusion and corruption. So that is there. So what I'm saying is basically a loan can default because of the banks, because they didn't follow the proper procedure while assessing a loan application and monitoring it subsequently. And also basically you can say in the overall architecture of the bank, which drives this sort of their business expansion and all. And another aspect could be basically what we have seen is in recent past, the rise of willful default. So what is willful default? Willful default is largely the misuse of funds, you can say. So misuse of fund and misuse of fund by borrowers. So a loan can also turn into NPA even the proposal was credible to some extent, because there were willful act from the borrower, and to misuse the fund. And the misuse of fund can be in different forms. I'm not getting into details here. So and the third category is the regulator. So while the transactions are happening, the role of regulator is basically to oversight the overall transaction in the economy. And so there can be the issues of regulatory failure. So that aspect can also play its role, can contribute in accumulation of NPA. And the fourth aspect is the overall economic policy, like the economic policy architecture. So when you basically attempts to build, why I'm saying this is important, because you can understand, like in 2009 or so, the first UP regime or so, there was this whole sort of issue of building infrastructure, and how it's the role of what is and how the public sector banks are supposed to sort of spearhead this building of infrastructure when it comes to financing big ticket infrastructure. So when you have a sort of a larger economic policy framework of that sort, then the other economic agents who are supposed to sort of function within that economic framework, they tend to sort of recalibrate their own approach, and the recalibration may not be prudent in the long run. That is what has happened, partly. So here I'm not trying to single out what actually led, though I have a few papers on it, and also currently I'm working on a project on this. So, but I'll just skip that. I'll just try to sort of briefly discuss. I discussed what are the possible sort of lapses, that could lead to NPA sort of crisis. And when I say basically this, with respect to the credit approach of the bank and about the due diligence, how do they sort of analyze, or how do they process a large an industrial project or infrastructure projects. So it's all about about their key aspects, which is basically, as I said, other than assessing the risk, their risk assessment model has to be very robust, which must include the viability of the project, the gestation period, the viability of recovery, the sort of the domestic economic outlook, and also the global economic scenario, taking everything together, and also the likelihood of sort of emergence of new technologies, the kind of competition that is emerging globally. So taking all these accounts, and also post sanction of sort of project, the issue of monitoring, accounting, and auditing. So those are the aspects which a bank is supposed to do, sort of to address this issue of NPA. Now coming to the fifth aspect, sort of component of my talk, which is about basically Npm management. So if you look at in recent past, what is the sort of approach of the RBI and the government in particular to sort of address this issue of NPA? So there has been much sort of emphasis on basically how to manage the existing NPA. There is not much emphasis on how to sort of restrict future NPAs happening. Basically, the NPA in recent past, like this year, the NPA figure has gone down. Partly, it's largely because of restructuring and also a lot of and all that. But it's not that the the NPA level has gone down substantially. And also there are other commentators, I mean, other sort of reports that suggest if we do regular exercise like AQR, we find actually the level of NPA going up, not going sort of down. So what I'm saying is basically the emphasis was on how to manage the existing NPA and not to sort of restrict future NPA. That's number one. And number two is within the sort of the framework of sort of trying to restrict the or manage the existing NPA. The whole approach was, how do you then sort of manage the NPA? There has been in the past, we have created AMCs, asset reconstruction companies. Has been also we have tried also like restructuring and all that, which has not worked clearly. Then the point is what kind of sort of policy approach that we may need when also in the recent past we sort of tried to address this issue of NPA by bringing IBC, insolvency bankruptcy code, but it doesn't seem to be working in favor of the banks, because if you see the number of cases that has gone through the IBC process, and if you see the resolution when it's to the recovery, basically value of recovery of bank loans, it's very less. And so it doesn't seem to be promising when it comes to whether the banks are able to recover their loan amount through IBC. It doesn't seem to be working. And the other part is about whether bad bank can work or not. My other co-panelists have already commented on it. See, this whole bad bank concept, it is worked earlier. A bad bank is nothing but a form of an asset management company. Then the point is, how do you sort of calibrate, or how do you structure that bank? The bad bank is critical and it's quite essential. It can potentially sort of address this issue of existing NPA. Why? It's because number one, we must, there's on the principle should be basically, the principle should be two. Number one, we must try to sort of segregate bad asset and good asset. So basically, so that the banks can further sort of expand their businesses, rather sort of getting stuck with how to manage the existing NPA. And the other aspect would be basically how can we basically maximize our recovery with minimum cost. So that should be our approach when it comes to formulating a bad bank. And if you go back, the successful bad bank model actually is the beginning of the you can say bad bank experiment. It began with the Swedish experiment. They had a bad bank called Sercom, and it was able to sort of recover 90%, more than 90% of the sort of the loans that it turned into NPA. But what is the difference between their experiment and the experiment that we have been doing or other countries have been doing? The experiment was largely, the bad bank that Swedish Sercom bank, Swedish bank adopted was that first it was a government owned bank. The government has to finance it. Then you have different ways to finance it. You can finance it through bonds. You can finance it through by sort of registering in the stock market, through by issuing of equities and all. But lastly, if you see the history of bad banks and also the Swedish experience, it was largely the money was raised to finance the bad bank, through by issuing sort of bonds. And for that you must have government ownership. Without, otherwise the sort of financing the bad bank through sort of, you can say, bonds will not work. The number to work while the ownership left sort of, ownership of the bank was with the government. But the management of the bank was largely, the professionals was largely outsourced from different banks to sort of, bring in efficiency into the system. That was number two. Number three in the sort of system was basically why bank had succeeded and what is the issue with the other AMCs now in India also. It's basically, for instance, at the current scenario, what you see is there is not much domestic demand. There's asset prices are, definitely not doing and appreciating. The asset market is not sort of robust at the moment. So if you try to first securitize the sort of NP, the failed loans, then the price of the loan, since you do not have a sort of appropriate market at the moment, then what will happen is basically, end of the day, even if you are able to sell it to someone else, the recovery would be very less. I may give you one example. For instance, Bank A had lent someone about 400 crore or 100 crore to a company, and in the process, what happens? Company failed to sort of repay its loan. Now, what happens is the banks took over of the assets of the banks of the company, and take the example of for a building. The bank is the bank and took over the sort of the assets of a company, including the building, and try to sort of sell it in the market. So when you to go and sell it in the market through different mechanism, you can sell it. If you, and through also AMCs, you can sell it. When you try to sell it in the market, or the AMCs took over the bad sort of assets and try to sell it in the market, what will happen is, since the market is not robust, asset market is not robust, you will fail to sort of, you may not be able to sell it. Number two, even if you are able to sell it, the price, the volume, the money that you get in return of that would be very less. So effectively, what happens is the bank is the net loser when it comes to recovering its amount. But what the CERCOM experience says is, suggests is basically what the CERCOM did, they segregated the assets from the banks of the Swedish banks, and then what they did is basically they repackaged it and they hold it for 3 years, 2 to 3 years, till the asset market started reviving, till the economy started doing good, till the global economy became robust. So then the point is, you can hold it for some period, then sell it so that your recovery is maximized. And that was the model of the Swedish model, sort of Swedish model, and they were quite successful. Others have not been successful because of the differences in terms of structure. When I say structure, it's about the ownership, and also about this principle of maximizing recovery with minimum cost. And if you can largely calibrate and play around that the way the Swedish experiment did, then perhaps we'll be able to sort of address this issue of maximizing recovery. Now coming to my last component, which is largely here, I'll be largely interacting with you after this talk on this, and Professor Ram Singh has brought up some of the issues that already have raised, and I'll be speaking here. So the issue is basically, one aspect is we have NPA, high level of NPA in Indian banks, and that too high level of NPA in public sector banks. How to address this? That is one aspect. The other aspect is, what is our overall approach to the banking sector? How do basically we visualize the future of our banking sector? That is another aspect. Why I'm asking this too, because the NPA crisis maybe will be over maybe in the short run or the medium term, but the banking infrastructure or the kind of banking structure that we are trying to build over time, that is also very important, given that we are a low income country, given that we are very much a developing country, and we need sort of public sector banks, or you can say banks which will sort of carry out or address the issues of development. That is very important. First, I will come to the issue of NPA. So far, what we have done is basically, what has been sort of our approach is, one approach has been merger. So, can merger sort of address the issue of NPA and address the issue of inefficiency in bank? I don't think so. If you see the global experience and experience of many other countries, including our own experience of merging SBI with its subsidiaries, will find, in fact, the data suggests actually the reverse happened when the SBI was merged with its subsidiaries, and a year after that, the NPA level of SBI went up substantially from 1.75 lakh crore to probably 2.25 lakh crore. So that is what happened. And the point is how sort of merger addresses the issue of sort of inefficiency. That is something to be seen. And as I said about the effectiveness of IBC doesn't seem to be effective on this aspect. When you see about the recovery, banks have not been able to sort of maximize their recovery uh, through IBC. The third aspect, as I mentioned about the bad bank, yes, bad bank can be a solution, but then the point is how do you structure it, how do you calibrate it? That is very much important. And the fourth aspect here, I'll be talking about why private banks should never be a policy option for us. So this is critical. There are a lot of sort of issues, as I mentioned earlier. First of all, private banks. See, typically when you talk about the commercial banks, we talk about intermediation. There is intermediation banks. The role of banks is basically to intermediate, receive deposits, and disburse loans. And the interest that is generated from the bank, you reinvest it, and also that is how you expand. But what is happening is, as I mentioned, if you see now there's been a change in the nature of intermediation, and there has been also a lot of disintermediation happening at the banking sector. What is it? We'll find in the private banks largely. We'll find uh, when it comes to earning in interest earning, the interest on basically your earning from interest may go down, but yet you can be profitable by investing somewhere else. So what is happening is basically you are no longer dependent on your loan portfolio to remain in business. Even if your loan portfolio is not working well for you and you are unable to earn enough adequate sort of interest earning, then what happens is because of your investment portfolio, if you can sort of, then the point is you can remain profitable, and that is what is happening largely in the private sector banks. So that is why here I say, comparing private banks and public banks when it comes to I mean, NPA is not fair. It's because the nature of lending of these bank categories are different, and the kind of functions they have been, the kind of role they have been playing in the economy is different. And lastly, if you say the nature of private bank, you cannot say also, they are like other commercial banks where the intermediation should be central to their functioning. And also about the issue of inefficiency, like somebody might say no, there are a lot of issues with the private bank, a lot of space for a lot of inefficiency that exists in the public sector banks, so the best way is to privatize them. But that is also not working. The recent episodes in any way, like I must say here, inefficiency is ownership neutral. We have seen it, what happened to the two leading private sector banks, what happened to them, what kind of mismanagement was happening, what kind of inefficiency happened there. It's not only that inefficiency, something we discovered here in India, Indian banks. Globally, you will find a lot of issues with the private sector banks and the whole during the collapse of the US collapse of US financial sector. You saw how so-called efficient sort of private investment banks, private also many private banks, what extent they were impacted and what kind of inefficiency did exist. And also from the point of view of a regulator and government, it's not prudent to privatize a bank. It's only because end of the day, like it happened in case of Lehman Brothers and all, government had to intervene in a big way when it comes to bank failure, whether it's a private bank or a public bank. Why? Because unlike the other sectors like the manufacturing sector or productive sector, the financial sector is different. How it's different? Because of its interconnectedness. Like the financial sector is quite integrated within the domestic financial market and also globally. So one big bank failing will have multiple repercussion effect within the economy and also outside. So what happens then to address that? The bank must the government must address, intervene in a big way, and that can even lead up to a bailout, which has happened in the past, like the way it happened in like 850 billion bailout US dollar in the US. The point is, even if it's a public sector bank or a private bank, in case of bank failure, the government need to intervene, that too in a big way to rescue the bank, given its repercussion. If the government doesn't intervene, whether it's a private bank or a public bank, it will have long-term effects on growth and other sort of macroeconomic aspects. So given this, it's very important. Then why to privatize? Why not try and make the public sector banks more efficient, given that in case of bank failure, the government must intervene and it is a cost on the government. Number two, the inefficiency in private sector bank can also exist. We have seen in recent past. And that brings us to the larger question, and the larger question is, about this whole question of, the issue of financial liberalization, whether how banking reforms sort of whether it's what did it achieve. See, the whole issue of, if I go back to 90s, the whole discourse was basically, we must liberalize the financial sector, and liberalization will and also the banking sector, that will lead to more efficiency in the banking system. If I sort of break this whole issue of efficiency, there was one aspect of operational efficiency, and another aspect of was allocative efficiency. So what we are told is basically, with greater competition with the private banks, the allocation there will be better allocation of resources, and with a lesser role, and with more sort of liberal with more liberalization, what will happen is the allocation process will be more efficient. But what we have seen is, over time, maybe to some extent, the operational efficiency did work also in public sector banks. When I say operational efficiency, to some extent it will work in the sense of its governance aspect, and aspects of how do you manage your staff, how do you manage your human resources and all that. But it never worked when it comes to allocation of resources, allocation of credit. That is why we have so much of NPA. So I'm not going to detail how do you analyze this, but this definitely puts a big question mark on the whole claim of the reform, which suggested that after reform, the allocative efficiency will definitely go off. But the rise of NPA doesn't suggest so. Now, coming to my last aspect, which is basically, what is the future of banking in India? I mean, what kind of bank, what sort of banking structure we will be requiring? Here, I must say, when you when you face this sort of question, what should be the future of banking landscape? We should try to sort of build or calibrate our approach to building a banking sort of structure vis-a-vis the kind of need or the kind of requirement that we may have in future as a developing country, rather than looking at the NPA crisis, the issue of inefficiency or efficiency. Of course, the issue of NPAs and efficiency or inefficiency must be addressed. That is, and we must also try to sort of increase the level of transparency in the banking system.
Short of time, sir.
Yeah, I'll conclude in a minute. Yeah. So what I'm trying to, when we try to address this question of the future of banking landscape, here we must try to mix visualize a banking structure of ours, given the need that we may require in future. Like, we are a developing country, and we also need development finance. The development finance must play a greater role if we are trying to pursue development in future. So what I'm trying to say is basically, of course, NPAs and efficiency is important, but that we can do without privatizing the bank. Number one. Number two, we must look at future, try to maximize our development need, and try to calibrate an appropriate banking sector policy. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm done. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite Mr. Brahma Reddy.
Yeah. Can you see my PPT?
Yeah, it's visible, sir.
Okay, and there is a background noise from the other side. Kindly mute everyone. Okay, thank you very much. Professor Ram Singh, Professor Mukherjee, Dr. Das, and Dr. Krishna Kumar, teacher in charge, and my colleagues and dear students. It is indeed a pleasure to be in this symposium on mainly and budget and related aspects. It is already 2 o'clock, so I do not want to, take a lot of time and thereby, deprive you of your lunch on time. Already Professor Mukherjee mentioned about the revenue side of the budget, particularly the GST revenue implications. Just to put the subject in perspective, the 15th Finance Commission had projected that for the financial year 2020-21, the states will be transferred 8,55,176 crore under the tax transfers. that is tax devolution, 8,55,176 crore. In the budget 2021, the Union Finance Ministry projected only 7,84,181 crore. That means there is a downward projection, downward revision of the tax transfers in the budget to the extent of 80,000 crore. But when you see the revised estimates for the 2021, revised estimates are more or less actuals going to be, it is just 5,49,959 crore. So there has been a massive shortfall in the transfers under the tax devolution criteria in the year 2021. If you compare the revised estimates vis-a-vis Finance Commission projections for 2021, it is about 3 lakh crore. Of course, states have been given permission to borrow extra, but this is, extraordinary in the history of Finance Commission, that in a particular year, the actual transfers are way below what was projected by the Finance Commission. Now, coming to the overall subject of transfers, you know that India got the independence on 1947, and we became a republic since 1950. Some of you may be studying political science, because the subject of Finance Commission is not just economics, a lot to do with the political science, particularly the Constitution of India. India's constitution is designed as a centripetal constitution in which central government is vested with vast powers in the areas of legislation and taxation. And you all know why. That, when we got independence in 1947, after the British rule for hundreds of years, there were hundreds of princely states, and many princely states refused to join Indian Union. So the constitutional makers were worried. What would happen if we make a fully federal country where states are given equal powers? Given their fear, they ensured that the Indian Constitution is a centripetal constitution by way of vesting a lot of powers with the union government. These powers are in the areas of legislation, taxation, etc. If you see the Article 246 of the Constitution, in the 7th schedule, the list of subjects under the competence of the union state are mentioned. 91 subjects are assigned to union, 66 subjects are assigned to state, and 47 subjects are in the concurrent list. If you see the developmental and social welfare functions, most of the functions are vested with the state government. Now, why Finance Commission then? On one hand, the powers to tax are vested with the union government, less powers to tax are vested with the state government. On the other hand, states have been given a huge number of development and welfare functions, which means states have to incur more expenditure on one hand, whereas they have little resources to raise on their own. Therefore, the Constitution had provided for a Finance Commission which would periodically review the union finances, state finances, and make recommendations with regard to devolution of taxes to the states. So as you all know, 15th Finance Commission is again extraordinary in the sense it has worked for 3+ years. They gave a report for 1 year, 2020-21, and they also gave another report for 2021-26. And I'm not going into the details of the terms of reference. If you look at the extent of the, the centripetal nature of our constitution, you can see of the combined resources generated by the union and states, 62.7% of the resources are generated by the union government. Resources here means the tax revenue, non-tax revenue, etc. Whereas states are only left with 37.3%. On the other hand, if you look at the expenditure profile of the combined expenditure of the states and union, states are incurring 62.4% of the expenditure. Center is incurring only 37.6%. So this is the vertical gap. This is the vertical fiscal gap we call in fiscal literature. That is, union government has more revenue vis-a-vis its expenditure. States have very less revenue vis-a-vis their expenditure commitments. Then how to address this? The only way we can address this vertical gap is through the Finance Commission transfers. Finance Commission in principle decides what percentage of union revenue should be shared with the states. Based on the assessment of states' revenue projections, based on the assessment of states' expenditure requirement, based on the assessment of union revenue and expenditure, the Finance Commission decides what percentage of union revenues should be shared with the states. The 15th Finance Commission retained the share of states at 42%, as was recommended by 14th Finance Commission. The only small difference vis-a-vis 14th Finance Commission is that out of 42%, 1% has been earmarked by the 15th Finance Commission for the newly created Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. Except that there is no change in the percentage of states' share in the central taxes and duties. So this is the criteria used by the various finance commissions in the past with regard to how to share the states' share amongst states. In the vertical sharing, we decided what share of central taxes and duties should be given to all states together. That is 41%. But how are we going to distribute that 41% amongst states? We have states as small as Goa and Sikkim. We have states as big as UP, where UP has 20 crore population, whereas Sikkim or Goa have about 20 lakh population. Can we distribute the states' share of taxes and duties equally among all states? No, that won't be acceptable. So there is a criteria for distribution of states' share of central taxes amongst states through various criteria, that is need and cost disability, equity and performancy. This is the variables used by various finance commissions from 11, 12, 13, 14. You can see we can classify this criteria into three categories: need and cost disability, equity considerations and performancy. Performancy criteria rewards performancy by states for tax efforts, for fiscal discipline. Tax effort is measured in terms of tax to state GSDP ratio. A state with a higher tax to GDP ratio will be rewarded for better tax performance. Similarly, for equity considerations, income distance is a dominant criteria for equity considerations. For need and cost disability, population and area and forest cover are used for devolution of state share amongst states. So the 15th Finance Commission has used the following criteria and weights. Population was given 15% criteria, 15% weightage. Area was given 15%, forest and ecology 10, income distance 45, and so on. So total adds up to 100. And the 15th Finance Commission has for the first time used a criteria known as demographic performance. And also the 15th Finance Commission restored the tax and fiscal effort criteria which was used prior to 14th Finance Commission. And in fact, the terms of reference of 15th Finance Commission created a kind of disturbance amongst the state government for the simple reason that the terms of reference categorically states that the Finance Commission shall use 2010 population instead of 1971 population, which has been used by various finance commissions until including 14th Finance Commission. This is the methodology based on which the state-wise shares within each of these criteria are decided. Take the case of population. We said that population has a weightage of 15%. What does it mean? How does this gets translated into the state-wise shares? For example, we have stated that 41% of the state, 41% of the central government revenue shall be shared with the states every year. Let's say this 41% is equivalent to 41 rupees. How this 41 rupees to be distributed among the states? The horizontal criteria tells us how that is distributed. When we gave population a weightage of 15%, it simply means 15% of the state's share, that is 41 rupees out of 100, shall be shared according to population criteria. So 15% of 41 rupee is about 6 rupees. Now these 6 rupees will be distributed amongst each and every state according to their share in the total population of the country. For example, UP's share of India's population is 15%. That means out of 6 rupee, which is allocated for distribution under population criteria, UP gets 15% of that. Let's say Bihar has 10% population in the total population of the country. Bihar gets 10% of the share under the population criteria. This is how each state is given a share under each of these criteria. As you can see, population has 15%, area has 15%, forest and ecology has 15%. Similarly, area criteria. How does area criteria translate into state-wise shares? It is similar to population. 15% of the state share, that is 40 rupee, which comes to be 6 rupee, shall be shared among the states by way of calculating each state's area in the total area of the country. If Rajasthan has 10% area in the total area of the country, 10% of the 6 rupee, that is 15% of 41 rupee, shall be distributed according to area criteria. Similarly, forest and ecology. We have some states with a very high percentage of forestry. And in fact, it is a cost to those states, because think of the opportunity cost of a forest. If you could, use it for cultivation, you could have more production and output. But since maintenance of forest is very important for environmental balance, these states have to be compensated for maintaining the forest. Therefore, 10% weightage is given. And how this 10% translates into state-wise shares? We take the total forest cover of the India and find out what is the each state share in the total forest cover of India, and distribute this 10% of the 41 rupee, where 41 rupee is the state share, according to the each state share in the total forest coverage of India. Similarly, income distance is an equalization criteria. Under income distance criteria, a state with a low per capita income will get a higher per capita transfer. As you know, we have states like Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha with very low per capita income. Under income distance criteria, they get a higher per capita transfer. Similarly, tax and fiscal effort, I mentioned about it. That is, tax GDP ratio is the variable here. That if a state has a better tax GDP ratio like Karnataka, around 10%, 11%, vis-a-vis Bihar or Jharkhand, around 5%, now Karnataka will be rewarded under tax effort criteria. So this is the methodology in detail, how each of these horizontal criteria translates into state-wise shares. So this is the shares that every state has been assigned by the 15th Finance Commission. So as is clear here, that UP gets 17%. UP's share is 17%. What does it mean? We said initially 41% of the central taxes and duties is the share of states altogether. In that 41%, UP gets 17%. That is 17% of 41. Similarly, West Bengal gets 7.523. Similarly, we have Kerala, which gets 1.925. Madhya Pradesh gets 7.850. These are the share of each state. These are the shares of each states, which adds up to 100%. Apart from tax devolution, the Finance Commission also recommends a revenue deficit grant. What is revenue deficit grant? Why should the Finance Commission recommend? It is also a constitutional mandate given to the Finance Commission to recommend revenue deficit grants. So when Finance Commission assesses that after tax devolution, a state is going to be in deficit, revenue deficit. Now Finance Commission has to recommend grant in aid of revenues to the extent equivalent to the shortfall in their overall revenues vis-a-vis expenditure that has been projected by the Finance Commission. In addition to revenue deficit grants, the Finance Commission also provides grants to the local governments. You all know that after 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts, we have created the third tier of governments, that is local governments. We have got union government at the top of the pyramid, then we have got state governments at present about 28 plus UTs 7. We have then local bodies. In local bodies, we have got rural local body, urban local body. Rural local bodies are popularly known as Panchayat Raj institutions. It is the mandate given to Finance Commission that Finance Commission also recommends grants in aid to the local bodies. The 15th Finance Commission recommended 4,36,361 crore as the total grants to be given to rural and urban local bodies in a period of 5 years, beginning from 2021 to 26. Apart from the grants to the local authorities, the Finance Commission also recommended grants for health. It has also recommended grants for other performance incentives and grants. And this is the total picture of the grants in aid recommended by the Finance Commission. We have revenue deficit grants 2,94,514 crore for 5-year period. Local body government, local government grant, disaster management grant, sector specific grant, sector grants for health, school education, and so on. Total worth of grants recommended by Finance Commission are 10,33,062 crore. In fact, this Finance Commission is quite different from the previous Finance Commissions for the simple reason that its terms of reference is very vast and for the first time includes a terms of reference with regard to defense and internal security and defense and internal security. So what is this defense and internal security? The Finance Commission recommended that the Union government may constitute a public account of India, a dedicated non-lapsable fund, modernization fund for defense and internal security. This is for the first time a Finance Commission recommended for the creation of a public account of India. And why we need an account of this kind? As you know, in defense procurement, there is a greater degree of uncertainty. Whenever funds are provided for capital acquisition does not take place in that year for a number of reasons. Reasons such as, we have to procure this capital equipment through a global tender. There is a huge uncertainty, lot of issues regarding, the corruption and etc. So whenever funds are provided, we are not able to procure. Whenever we want to procure, we can procure, funds are not available. So the Finance Commission recommended that there should be dedicated public account wherein funds once provided, if not spent, will be transferred to the public account of India so that these funds are available as and when procurement takes place. Just to give an example, recently India bought 32 Rafale aircraft from France. It is about $8 billion. Funds were provided a long time ago, but the procurement process took too long time. By the time we procured and we have to make payment, funds are not available. We are in COVID time. If we could transfer the funds related to defense and internal security to a dedicated fund, that fund will act as a non-lapsable fund. As you know, the basic principle of budgeting is that if funds are not spent in that financial year, the funds would lapse. You have to ask a fresh funds for the same thing that you have proposed the previous year. So to take care of defense and internal security, which are topmost priorities for any government, the Finance Commission recommended that we should create a non-lapsable fund for meeting the defense and internal security related expenditure. The Finance Commission also recommended fiscal consolidation map. As you know all, as Professor Mukherjee stated, the Union government fiscal deficit for the current year is about 9.5%. Similarly, states were permitted to borrow from 3 to 4% of their fiscal GDP. The fiscal deficit cap put by FRBM Act was only 3%. But in this extraordinary year, Centre permitted them to borrow up to 4% of their GSDP. In addition to that, 1 more % they can borrow, provided they achieve certain reforms. They implement certain reforms, 4 reforms that have been linked. That is, reforms linked additional borrowing facility given by the union government. In the next year also, that is 21-22, the fiscal situation is not going to be that favorable. So center will likely to borrow more than what it is projected, about 6% they have projected. It's going to be even more. And it may take another 1 year or so to completely stabilize the situation. So I would like to stop here.
Thank you, sir. Due to time constraints, because we have exceeded the time limit of the symposium, we won't be able to take questions today.
Yes.
So, sorry about that. Now, I would like to request Mr. Amit to come and give the vote of thanks and the closing remarks for today's symposium.
Frankly speaking, it was an amazing session for me as an individual. I learned a lot, and I feel that probably the listeners have also learned a lot. The crisis and the opportunity linkage, in the context of budget, as Professor Ram Singh stated. Now, it was an amazing thing which we learned today. In fact, as Dr. Sachinananda, he said about GST compensation bodies, the stabilization of GSTs, and the power-based approach. No, I probably these things will entice even the students also, and they can carry on with their own thinking on these these topics. And finally, with Santosh, Dr. Santosh Das, offering his advice on the NPAs and about the banking reconstruction. And finally, we also learned a lot of things about the transfers which are being done through the 15th Finance Commission and all. So it was an amazing session, and I, Amit Kumar Jha, on behalf of Department of BA Program Committee, as well as the Department of Economics, would like to express sincere gratitude towards Professor Ram Singh, towards Dr. Sachidanand Mukherjee, towards Dr. Dr. Santosh Das, and Dr. Brahma Reddy, sir, for taking out their time and discussing and giving us beautiful insights in the topic, we have just covered today. Finally, I would also like to express my gratitude towards the principal ma'am, who took out the time for giving opening remarks, and not to mention our HOD Krishna Kumar sir, as well as thanks also goes to Mr. Naresh, the BA program committee convener, Sahai sir. So yeah, this is all from our side, and I hope that the listeners have had a great time listening to the esteemed speakers. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming. It was an amazing experience. Thanks.
Yes, Mr. Amit.
Yeah.
Kindly collect the PPT so that you could share with all the participants, students.
Yes, sir. We will do that, sir. We will do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ram Singh, for being here for more than 2.5 hours.
Thanks,
Right,
Dr. Ram Singh.
Right, sir. Right.
Thanks, Brahma Reddy, and thanks, Sandosh, also for presenting.
Right.
Dr.
Right,
Sachidanand could not be there. Thank you so much.
Sir. Yeah, thanks, Krishna Kumar sir. Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Amit, might be we can close the meeting.